Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome to our next Patreon supporter lecture. This one is called Unmarried Women in Fairy Tales, and it is in honor of our awesome patron, Stacy Shirk.
Yes, we're delighted that Stacy picked this topic. There is honestly an endless amount of information that we considered trying to shoehorn into this. We, culled it down, and we think that what we have today is really a very interesting starting point, and it's a topic that we have a lot of feelings about. So let's
We
let's
have
get into the
feelings.
stories and the feelings. Okay, so we all know that fairy tales and heteronormative romance kind of go hand in hand in our society, at least in terms of how these things are perceived. Think about things like fairy tale weddings and dreams about true love's kiss. All of these things together in Western culture just seems to love to reinforce boy meets girl plot as at least a starting place in fairy tales. Like they locate that all of this stuff lives in fairy tales, comes from fairy tales, and is just the way things are in fairy tales and elsewhere. So, for
Just very
example,
centralized generally.
yeah, very much so. So let's just think about some of our most famous fairy tales, the ones where, like, if you say, name a fairy tale, someone might just say Cinderella. So in Cinderella, the protagonist longs to go to a ball. And when she goes, she falls in love with a handsome prince. And the prince is just like, oh my God, what a babe. And when she runs away,
Off my chest.
yes, he searches the country for her. And he finds her, and it's all very romantic, and they get married in the end.
Heart.
There are a lot of other
Happily
versions of
ever after.
Cinderella. It's more complicated, but that is the big, like, culturally known version. Or we could think about Sleeping Beauty. And in that story, the only thing that would make the life of the king and queen better is that they have a child, which is, culturally perceived to be the number one goal of any heteronormative romance, of course. And when that girl is cursed to sleep, she can only be awakened by her true love, who is a prince. So really, it's just like heteronormative romance, like all the way down, kind of undergirding that fairy tale. Or we could look at another super famous one like Snow White, where the evil queen is just really ticked off because this mirror, who a lot of critics like to interpret as being a stand in for the patriarchy, this queen, because of the mirror, thinks that her stepdaughter is prettier than her. So she tries to murder her. And then what is Snow White's reward for surviving all of this? Well, marriage to a prince, obviously. So on a surface level, this isn't looking good, right? Or like it's looking like there is kind of one true path, one way to proceed through these fairy tales, which is to follow the path of heteronormative romance.
Yeah,
But
it really, really seems like fairy tales just really, really push that whole idea: romance, one man, one woman, happily ever after, marriage is the end of the story. Um, But
but
it's worth knowing that the fairy tales that we think of as canonical, like the ones that Sarah mentioned, like the Big Ten of fairy tales, they enforce, right? They wanted to think about values that were important to them, and they sort of put the fairy tales out there more and more that really trumpeted those kinds of values. These stories were printed over and over again because they checked the fairy tale story box that the public craved without being as subversive as other fairy tales could be, at least not on the surface.
yeah, we're not saying this is like a nefarious conspiracy. We're saying think about who the editors were for
Right.
collections of fairy tales, who owned the printing presses, who had the resources to make the books and print the books and decide what goes into the books that determine what gets into the books, and that determines which ones proliferate.
Exactly. So we're not saying that this is the only reason. These are the only reasons that these fairy tales in particular are the ones that got as popular as they did, but it's definitely part of the reason, and that's important. And for our purposes of our talk in particular, that's really important for why we don't think of unmarried women when we think of fairy tales. We told the same stories over and over again to the point where tales with different messages became less and less well known.
Okay, so this obviously isn't the whole story. And the thing is, women being really badass on their own, whether within a heteronormative romance or marriage or without it, is actually really common in fairy tales, maybe much more common than you might think. And we're going to talk about a bunch of the unmarried ones today. So, just a brief side note, in this particular talk, we're going to focus on fairy tale women that, as far as we know, have never been married. But we do want to take a moment to recognize all of the former wives and single and widowed mothers throughout the tales as well, because they're there too. They're probably more than you realize, and a lot of them are surprisingly awesome as well. We want to do a quick shout out in particular to Snow White and Rose Red's widowed mother, who raises her two girls alone in the forest and teaches them to be fantastic. And they seem to have like a really beautiful and harmonious life together. We just absolutely love that story, but we're not going to talk about it in detail today. We're also not going to get into the plethora of clever girls who avoid bad marriages, since heteronormative romance is still a major part of their stories. But shout out to Fitcher's Bird in particular, which is an incredible fairy tale. We highly recommend you Googling it and reading it if you haven't already. It's got a really, really amazing heroine who's just like, yeah, no, not gonna marry you, gonna rescue my sisters. Stay single, avoid this whole Bluebeard situation. It's pretty great.
Exactly. You guys are all amazing too. But for now, we're going to talk about the unmarried women in fairy tales who don't really have anything to do with marriage in the traditional heteronormative sense.
We had to narrow it down somehow.
Yeah, exactly. It's only supposed to be a 30-minute talk. It's probably going to be longer, but
we'll see.
All right. So if you want to be a powerful single woman in a fairy tale, the fastest way, hands down, is to become a witch or a fairy. This is basically how unmarried women get to exist in fairy tale worlds and the way that they get to be powerful and awesome on their own. So witches and fairies are interesting in fairy tales because they're kind of interchangeable. So, for example, in The Witch in Rapunzel is a fairy, or in the very first 1812 Grimm version of the story. She is changed, the word is changed to sorceress. It has become more common to see it as witch nowadays. And so that, the idea that in the first versions that the Grimms were writing down, she was a fairy is an interesting thing to think about when you think about the story of Rapunzel. This also happened to the fairies in Charles Perrault's French Sleeping Beauty. The Grimms transformed them into witches or wise women, when in their version of the same story, which they called Little Briar Rose, presumably because fairies were seen as a little too French for them. Fairies were definitely associated with France and French folklore, which the Grimms were trying to get away from when they were putting together their German collections of fairy tales, but they really liked Sleeping Beauty, so they figured out a way to stick her in there anyway. So it's weird that the two major figures of unmarried women are magical beings who have magic in some way and who can be painted as fairies, which is generally more on the good side, and witches, which are generally more on the bad side, and wise women who kind of hover in between. So both figures have connections to older European pagan goddesses, and in many ways they fill the same kinds of roles in these kinds of stories. They can function as helping figures, or they can be evil foes. They can curse just as fast as they can aid, which also gives them a kind of agency that a lot of other women in the tales don't get. They are kind of either, to be a successful girl in a fairy tale, you have to be very, very good most of the time. And these women don't really have to follow those kinds of rules. So, most importantly for our current purposes, all of these women that we've mentioned are unmarried and wildly powerful on their own. So, we're going to talk about a few of them right now.
I do feel like there's something that you could potentially unpack here about, well, we just want to talk about all the witches and fairies because they're awesome and powerful and we love them. But I think there's also something to be said about like what it takes to be untouched by like the heteronormative push to become part of like a nuclear family unit in these
Yep.
stories, that you have to be like magically insulated not to be caught up in that as part of the trauma.
Yeah,
And
it's also, I mean, in my dissertation, I argued that making a woman into a fairy or a witch or another magical creature kind of let them be powerful without really saying that women could be powerful. Only these supernatural, not exactly in our real world kind of women can be powerful, not actual women.
yeah, and like we said, there are other women in fairy tales, obviously, who are not witches or fairies and remain unmarried, but it does seem like this layer of like magic allows them to exist a little bit apart and also allows them to occupy this space of power without necessarily drawing suspicion or ire. Like, it's not to say that all of these witches are like looked at as being like awesome community icons exactly. People are definitely still very like, I don't know about that witch.
Yeah.
But, they're not showing up with pitchforks. And, these women aren't subject to what their neighbors really think about them. Like, they don't really care if their neighbors don't really like them. They're offered a kind of protection in these stories by their status as being slightly apart. And you can read that as positive or negative, but it's there and
Yeah.
it's interesting. And we wanted to at least acknowledge that. Let's talk about these stories. Baba Yaga transcends definition because she is an amalgamation of deities mixed with a dose of sorcery, shamanism, and fairy lore. And she is so powerful that she does not owe allegiance to the devil, God, or even her storytellers. In fact, she opposes Judeo Christian and Muslim deities and beliefs. She is her own woman, a parthogenic mother, and she decides on a case by case basis whether she will help or kill the people who come to her hut. And that is a quote from fairy tale scholar Jack Seitz about, of course, Baba Yaga, who is one of our very favorite figures pretty much ever from fairy tales, really, from
It's hard not to
from
be like,
life.
yeah, when you think about
I
Baba
know.
Yaga.
It's hard not to be on board for Baba Yaga, and we'll tell you why. So, Baba Yaga is from a whole tradition of fairy tales and folklore, largely from Russian and Slavic fairy tales. And she is a powerful witch of the woods, kind of this strange fae woman who is so old that you know that she has forgotten more than you're ever going to know in your whole life. And she is the figure that you turn to when there is no one else left to turn to. She's like your last resort. She features primarily in Russian and Slavic folklore, but nowadays you can find her kind of everywhere as this sort of pop culture figure. She also
John Wick,
exists.
for example, with the
John
John
Wick,
Wick movies, they call her
yeah,
Baba Yaga, which is so
and
strange
she
to us.
It shows up in video games. There's a lot of Baba Yaga inspired jewelry floating around out there, which we adore.
Mm-hmm.
There's just she's kind of like made the leap from sort of semi-obscure fairy tale character to like icon. There's a lot of Baba Yaga going on right now. Another
We're here
interesting
for
thing,
it.
yes. Another interesting thing about her is that she exists in multitudes. Quoting again from Jack Seitz, he says, in many tales there are three Baba Yaga, often sisters, and in some tales a Baba Yaga is killed only to rise again. No Baba Yaga is exactly like another. Some people like to describe Baba Yaga as being more like a title. You might hear someone say the Baba Yaga. You might hear it used more as a name. It really varies a lot depending on the tale and the context. But it's really fun when like three of her show up in one fairy tale and it's just surplus of Baba Yaga everywhere. It's a good time. So, unlike most other fairy tale characters, aside from Jack, really, like of Jack and the Beanstalk, but also Jack of 50,000 other fairy tales and folk tales, Baba Yaga, or a Baba Yaga, or the Baba Yaga, appears in several different fairy tales with completely different plot lines. This is why it's so hard to pin down exactly what she is like as a character because she changes from fairy tale to fairy tale. So our favorite way to describe Baba Yaga is really actually in D&D terms, Dungeons and Dragons, for those who are not nerdy in this particular direction. She is the essence of chaotic neutral. And one more quote from Zeitz, he says, she can be generous with her advice, yet her counsel and help do not come cheaply. For a Baba Yaga is always testing the people who come to her hut by chance or choice. So she might help you, but she might also kill you or ruin your life. You really just don't know why. Or eat you.
Very cannibalistic.
She is very cannibalistic. That's why, you go to her as a last resort when you've exhausted all of your other options because she might be like, nah, not feeling you today, and
gonna eat you instead.
Yep. Or she might be like, I have taken a fancy to you, my child. Like, I shall smooth your path and make sure that you are showered with riches. Like, you just don't know. We also just have to add, in case you don't know, that she is strongly associated with her house, which is a cottage that runs around on chicken feet. So it's like an animated house. If you think of Miyazaki's film version of Howl's Moving Castle, the way that house is depicted, like on the feet that walk around, very, very Baba Yaga inspired. She also likes to fly around on her mortar and pestle, which is like a thing that you can use to grind up herbs for your potions and, culinary needs. I have one. Why not? But mine is, culinary sized, and hers is Baba Yaga sized so that she can fly around on it. And it's wonderful. I mean, she's just so extra. Her house is extra, her accessories are extra. And we just really enjoy her stories because they are so unpredictable, because she herself is so unpredictable.
I love this little house.
It's very good.
I found it on Etsy. It's I can't remember the person who made it, but you can find it if you look on Etsy. It's just a little Baba Yaga house ornament, and you can see chicken feet.
Chicken feet. I mean, that's how I wish I could get around. Like,
I know. I mean, that's very convenient.
My walking house, so I don't have to leave it until I get to where I'm going.
Okay, our next one. When the accident happened to the princess, the good fairy who had saved her life by condemning her to sleep 100 years was in the kingdom of Mataquin, 12,000 leagues away. She was instantly warned of it, however, by a little dwarf who had a pair of 7-league boots, which are boots that enable one to cover 7 leagues in a single step. The fairy set off at once, and within an hour her chariot of fire, drawn by dragons, was seen approaching.
I swear our criteria for selecting women for this talk was not that they have fabulous modes of transportation.
But it helps.
Despite how it may seem, but it does help, doesn't it?
Well, it just really seems to emphasize how cool these people are. So and honestly, like, we have no idea why people are not talking about the chariot of fire drawn by dragons and the lady who drives it more, because this feels like a huge oversight. This is obviously the 12th fairy from Perrault's version of Sleeping Beauty. And she is actually just really awesome in a lot of ways. And, the focus in Sleeping Beauty goes to the princess who's cursed to sleep for 100 years and all of that stuff. And all of that's, very interesting. I love Sleeping Beauty. But the 12th fairy doesn't get nearly as much attention as she should. Not only does she have a chariot of fire drawn by dragons, But she's also just a really shrewd and brave and thoughtful character. She is the one who realizes that the 13th fairy has bad intentions and guesses that some mischievous gift, is the way that Perrault puts it, will be bestowed on the princess. And when she realizes it, she's the only one who kind of does. And so she hides. So she will be the last fairy to give the princess a gift. In the hustle and bustle of all the fairies giving gifts, it's not realized that nobody realizes that the 12th fairy is gone, which means that the 13th fairy goes ahead and gives her final gift, what's supposed to be the final gift, and that is that the princess will die when she touches a spinning wheel on her 16th birthday. And because the 12th fairy was smart enough to realize what was going on, she is able to pop out after that and mitigate that, change it into the gift of sleeping for 100 years and being woken up by a prince, as opposed to dying immediately upon touching the spinning wheel. She's also brave enough to stand up to the bad fairy, even though she knows she's not as powerful. She says that, I can't, take away the curse entirely because I'm not as powerful as the older fairy, but I can make it a little bit better. And in doing that, she's really like going against the bad fairy and kind of putting herself out there in a way that she knows she's not as powerful and can't really compete with the older fairy. So she's really taking a chance by doing this, but she does this because it's the right thing to do.
I have to jump in and say how weirdly profound I'm finding this as you're talking about it. And I have to say, I've never really thought about it in these terms before, but like it's weirdly inspirational, I think, what
Mm-hmm.
she does here, because I feel like, in day-to-day life, so many of us, definitely me, I feel like I can't fix everything. Like I can't, go against what has happened, in the world or something. I can't undo all of it by myself. And the 12th fairy, is in that kind of quandary. And she's like, okay, I might not be able to undo what has been done, but I can do something.
But I can do something. I can make it a little bit better, because
Like it would
this
be
isn't
so
fair what
easy,
has
yeah,
happened to this little girl.
to just give up and be hopeless about it. And instead, she's like, okay, I can't fix the whole thing, but I can make it a little better. I can do something. I can, create space for a chance. And I think that's really inspirational.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think she just doesn't, she gets overlooked a lot.
Hmm.
It's also worth pointing out that at the once the curse has come to pass, and she is, the princess is going to sleep for 100 years, she actually behaves in really, like, she's very thoughtful about what she does after that, because so the princess is asleep. Everybody's very sad that the princess is asleep, but she comes and she puts all of the rest of the castle to sleep as well. And it depends on the story. Sometimes she leaves out the king and queen at seemingly at their request, which I always think is a little bit weird, but they have like the excuse is that they have to go like rule the rest of the country, and so they can't fall asleep with the rest of the castle. But she puts like the princess's little dog to sleep, so the dog will be there when she wakes up. And I love that. I think that's very kind. And she also goes out of her way to process something like, oh, I'm not 100% sure this is true, but it seems like the 12th fairy gave the princess good dreams while she was sleeping, because she seems to know who the prince is when she wakes up. She's like, I've been waiting for you. You took me a long time. And it seems like the fairy is giving her good dreams. And I love retellings of this story where that run with that idea that the princess is having this entire adventurous life in her dreams before she has to wake up, all courtesy of the 12th fairy. So she's a pretty cool unmarried lady too.
Okay. Next one. Aha, said she. So you saw the witch properly outfitted. I have been waiting for you and wanting you for a long time. Light the way for me now. With that, she turned the girl into a block of wood and threw it into the fire. When it was thoroughly aglow, she sat down next to it and warmed herself by it, saying, "It gives such a bright light." And that is a quote from Frau Trude, as told by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. We pretty much talk about Frau Trude every chance that we get. Like, seriously,
Pretty
give
much.
us like half an excuse.
Because we're little K. Turner groupies.
We are K. Turner groupies. But we think it's a really, really interesting fairy tale. It's very, very short. You can read it in like 2 minutes because it's like a page long. But we've never been able to look at the story the same way since hearing folklorist Kay Turner's take on it, which is written out in the book Transgressive Tales, Queering the Grimms, edited by Kay Turner herself and Pauline Greenhill. So definitely check out Kay Turner's article in there, but we'll kind of sum up what's going on in there for you right now. So, on the surface of the story of Frau Trude, which you might not know because it's fairly obscure, it reads like a very straightforward cautionary tale. Basically, what happens is that there is this girl and she's very disobedient, she's very willful. Her parents are like, don't go seek out the witch in the woods. Like, it's going to go really badly for you. Don't do it. And she's like, I'm gonna. And she goes out anyway. In the woods and she gets her comeuppance when Frau Trude, the witch that she is gone to find, immediately turns the girl into a log and then sets her on fire, like in her fireplace. The drama, like it's just
so much drama. Look at this picture. Look at the hands. God. No, it's like.
Why did we both do that? What's wrong with us?
I don't know. I don't know why we're laughing about it. It seems pretty horrifying.
I don't know why we're laughing. We're bad people. But under the surface of this straightforward cautionary tale, Kay Turner argues that there's a whole nother different interpretation happening. One in which the girl actually seeks out Frau Trude because she is drawn to her, which is an understanding of the tale that, to quote Turner, begs for queer interpretation. Thus, working through Frau Trude leads down a winding path of transgressive wonder to arrive at bolder possibilities for understanding the diversities of desire between older and younger women. So in this reading, in Kay Turner's reading, the girl's transformation into fire is actually a metaphor for her sexual awakening. So Turner argues that she's not destroyed, merely transformed into another state of being, one in which her passion or fire for the witch may be expressed. So you might be thinking, okay, this sounds cool, but like, why are you talking about it in a lecture about unmarried women in fairy tales? Well, we wanted to take a minute to acknowledge that unmarried doesn't necessarily mean not in a relationship, and that many different kinds of relationships have been unrecognized or impossible to legalize historically. So we actually think that Turner's argument here about Frau Trude being a coded lesbian romance is really fitting. It's another way that we can think about the stories of single women in fairy tales. But like seriously, just read Turner's article in Transgressive Tales if you get a chance, because it's just, wow, it's so good.
Okay. The little mermaid now came to a space of marshy ground in the wood, where large, fat water snakes were rolling in the mire and showing their ugly, drab-colored bodies. In the midst of this spot stood a house built with the bones of shipwrecked human beings. There sat the sea witch, allowing a toad to eat from her mouth, just as people sometimes feed a canary with a piece of sugar. She called the ugly water snakes her little chickens and allowed them to crawl all over her bosom. I know what you want, said the sea witch. It is very stupid of you, but you shall have your way, and it will bring you to sorrow, my pretty princess. Okay, so we've got to be clear up front. Anderson obviously does not paint a exceptionally flattering picture of the sea witch here. He says things like she laughs loud and disgustingly and clearly doesn't think very much of her decor, if you go by that quote we just read.
I kind of like her decor.
I kind of like her decor too. I'm like, all right. You know?
I stay with my like Gideon the Ninth like bone
little
pin
button
on my collar. I'm like,
still
I like it.
However, he never describes what she actually looks like or comments on her body at all. So we're kind of left to imagine what the sea witch is actually like herself. And even though Anderson doesn't seem to like her, we think she's kind of amazing. Now, of course, they're with a couple of caveats, but here, she's very powerful. She's very direct. She doesn't deceive the Little Mermaid. In fact, she tells her up front that her choice here isn't going to make her happy, but she offers the help that she asks for. She's not really, not like in the Disney version where Ursula has like this whole like agenda going on. The Sea Witch is just like, all right, I'll give you what you want. It's not going to make you happy, but I can help you if this is, really what you desire. Also, we really like all of her weird little pets. We think they're very nice.
I know. I like this vision of life. Like that probably sounds really, really weird in the context.
Why?
But
why is this supposed to be bad? She's hanging out in her cool little house that she seemingly built herself. Yes, out of bones, but she's using her natural resources.
Natural resources.
That is natural resources, man.
Yep. And she has all of her, like, she's friends with nature. Like, she's enjoying nature, she's enjoying her house.
Her little chickens are little, that's so cute. Like, she calls them her little chickens, the little water snakes.
I mean, like, it honestly seems like she is at peace with her whole deal, which is hashtag goals. Like, a lot of what she has going, like, I'm like saying all this while looking at this picture of her where she looks absolutely terrifying. Thank you, Harry Clark, for this incredible illustration.
I love this image. All the water snakes are like swimming all around her. She looks like she's like, powerful in this picture.
I know. I mean, I love it so much. I have this print on a dress. Like, I'm not saying this in a negative way, but like she's feeling herself. She's feeling her vibe, and we can't help but respect that. We don't really recommend like collecting tongues as payments. Like, we're not here for that part of the story.
No, but we do love that she insists on getting paid for her work. I mean, she's not just a witch in the woods. Not, this is her job, and she's like, I need payment for my services. And honestly, like I feel like that doesn't get emphasized enough. Like she's like, all right, like I can help you. You will pay me and you will give me something of extreme value for the service that I'm going to do for you. And, kind of, boss babe goals.
Oh, no. I mean, yeah, again, other than like causing the chronic pain and stealing tongues, I agree. I may not.
She causes the chronic pain. I think she's like, it's gonna hurt to transform your tail into legs, and
okay, that's fair.
Nothing you can do about that. I don't think she's like doing it on purpose.
Okay, I can buy that argument. But yeah, we're very team Sea Witch. Like, we like that she has her setup, she has her job, she takes pride in her Sea Witch job,
Sea Witch
and calls it like it is. I mean, I think that this is a pretty solid vision of singlehood.
Yeah.
Fight me.
Fight me.
Please don't fight me. I don't want to fight. I really don't. I
really enjoy the I keep coming back to the pets. I love the little pets that she's taking care of. They're like the gross, slimy water creatures that people are like, about, but she's like, oh, come here, little toad, you can eat some sugar out of my mouth. And I'm like, that's really nice. That nice little toad friends, nice little snake friends.
So anyway, that's our take on The Little Mermaid.
Whatever, I stand by this.
I stand by it too. I really do. All right. Finally, she came to a small house. An old woman was peering out from inside. She had very large teeth, which frightened the girl, and she wanted to run away. But the old woman called out to her, "Don't be afraid, dear child. Stay here with me, and if you do my housework in an orderly fashion, it will go well with you. Only you must take care to make my bed well and shake it diligently until the feathers fly. Then it will snow in the world. I am Frau Holla." Because the old woman spoke so kindly to her, the girl took heart and agreed, and started in her service. The girl took care of everything to Frau Holla's satisfaction, and always shook her feather bed vigorously, until the feathers flew about like snowflakes. Therefore, she had a good life with her, no angry words, and boiled or roast meat every day. And this is from the fairy tale Mother Holla, which is told here by the Brothers Grimm, going heavy on the Grimms today. So this story, like Frau Trude, might be a bit unfamiliar to you, but it is a version of a very common fairy tale type, which folklorists call the kind and unkind girls, which are grouped together under the family of stories with the number ATU 480, which if you don't know the ATU index, don't worry about it. It's just a way that folklorists categorize fairy tales together by number instead of by name. So in these tales about the kind and unkind girls, usually there's a pair of sisters, sometimes they're stepsisters, usually they're related in some capacity. And one of the girls is very kind to a stranger. Sometimes the stranger is scary or ugly or difficult, demanding in some way, or sometimes they're just, in need of help and just ask for help. And the kind girl says, yeah, I'll help you out. And she is fabulously rewarded. And then the second sister sees the first girl's awesome reward and is like, I need that too. Give that to me. But then she's rude to the person who needs help, and she is punished for being a jerk face. So in this fairy tale,
Pretty terrible ways.
pretty terrible ways, yeah, a lot of the time. But in this fairy tale, Mother Holla is intimidating initially. Like the kind girl is scared by her large teeth. I get some, big bad wolf vibes off of that. But she's very fair. And she's actually quite kind, especially compared to the home that the kind girl is fleeing from, where she's treated really abusively, actually. Mother Holla, by contrast, appreciates the work that the girl does and rewards her with, food and a home and cleanliness and kindness. She's really actually a very interesting figure because we have questions about the connection here between the feathers in her bed and snow. The idea that when the girl shakes her, like her bedding, and makes the feathers fly, that causes snow to fall in the world. So we feel like she has something very elemental going on here.
Totally.
Yeah, like she's maybe some kind of wintry spirit, queen, quasi goddess. It's very unclear. This is definitely still the realm of a fairy tale, but it feels like it's at least hinting at other kinds of folk narrative, and that she's just a very fair and righteous snow queen, which we enjoy.
No, I'm like, that's really cool. I like picturing her as like a snow queen.
Yeah. And she is like maybe one of the least or less overtly magical characters that we're looking at here. I mean, generally speaking, she just kind of looks like a lady who is living, well, I don't know about that. She's like living in another like dimension or world that the girl like falls into. I take it back.
She doesn't really do any
magical.
Well, I mean, the snow is magical, but like, it generally seems that she lives her life pretty simply otherwise.
Yeah, her pleasure and displeasure do have pretty epic magical consequences, but her day-to-day life seems like the trappings of it are not sort of steeped in magic the way that, things are for the sea witch maybe. But her magical connections are very satisfying. Like it feels like a story about justice. It feels like Mother Holla, just gets to kind of like live her life, give help where she sees fit, not give help when people are cruel to her. She feels very self-sufficient and, sort of interested in the characters of the people who come to see her.
Agreed. All right, last one. We love this lady who is not very well known, and we're very excited to bring her to you. So there was once upon a time a very old woman who lived with her flock of geese in a waste place among the mountains, and there had a little house. The waste was surrounded by a large forest, and every morning the old woman took her crutch and hobbled into it. There, however, the dame was quite active, more so than anyone would have thought considering her age, and collected grass for her geese, picked all the wild fruit she could reach, and carried everything home on her back. Anyone would have thought the heavy load would have weighed her to the ground, but she always brought it safely home. If anyone met her, she greeted him quite courteously. "Good day, dear countryman, it is a fine day. Ah, you wonder that I should drag grass about, but everyone must take his burden on his back." Nevertheless, the people did not like to meet her if they could help it, and took by preference a roundabout way. And when a father with his boys passed her, he whispered to them, "Beware of the old woman. She has claws beneath her gloves. She is a witch." Okay, so we would not be surprised if you didn't know this one, but it is one of our favorite Grimm fairy tales, and just doesn't get talked about very much because it's called. Part of the reason is that it's called The Goose Girl at the Well, and there's another fairy tale called The Goose Girl, and that one is more well known. It's still not super well known. That's the one where the servant forces the princess to switch places with her, and there's like the talking horse head and all of that stuff. You're probably, if you may have come across that one, but we think this one deserves more attention than it gets. It's a neat little mix-up of stories. And the old woman who they're talking about here, the old witch in the story, is a tricky and thoughtful person who basically she takes in a princess who is thrown out of her home in a bad way. It's basically the Love Like Salt story where she tells her father she doesn't know what to compare her love for him to, and it gets misinterpreted. She gets thrown out, and she goes and lives with
basically Act 1 of King Lear.
King Lear.
Yeah. King Lear.
Yeah, exactly. And so she gets thrown out. She goes to live with this old witch who kindly takes her in and keeps her safe by giving her this like old woman skin that she wears around so nobody can tell that she's actually a beautiful princess. And the witch in the story not only takes care of her, but she comes across this man, this count, who the princess, she decides that the princess, this might be the guy who's going to rescue the princess and bring her back home, and she decides to test him by making him carry her up the mountain, essentially, and she gets heavier and heavier as he goes, but he never complains. And
he complains a lot.
Well, yeah, but he doesn't. He doesn't put her down, basically. So he passes the test. Okay, he does complain a little bit, but he still does it. He goes up, he takes care of the old woman, and she's like, "All right, you are okay. I will let you, fall in love with the princess in hiding." So, and then at the end, she orchestrates everything to bring everybody together. She gives the princess her house, which transforms into another beautiful palace, and all is right with the world. And at the beginning of the story, this is one of the weird little quirks about this story is at the beginning, there are all these rumors that she's a witch, right? And people are scared of her. And she definitely has some magical ability. I mean, like, giving the princess an old woman's skin to wear around is a little bit weird. And but at the end of the story, the Grimms add this little bit where they say something like they're sure that she wasn't really a witch, but instead just a very good, wise woman. And this is interesting because this is what they call, they switch the fairies in Sleeping Beauty to wise women as well. And it seems like when there is definitely a witchy character, the Grimms like to change good witches into wise women instead of using the word witch, which is a very interesting little detail. But yeah, so this story is strange. We encourage you to check it out. We really like the old lady in this story who is maybe a witch, maybe just a wise old woman. I don't know if she knows how to skin ladies and put other ladies into other people's skins. I feel like that's definitely in witch territory, but we won't say anything about that.
Yeah. One thing I like about this lady is that she very much seems to be like, her vibe is, you're all doing it wrong. Like, she's very, like, I feel like the mean word for this is meddlesome, and like the kind way to put it is that she's very efficient at managing things and setting it to rights.
The people in the story need to be managed.
They really do. They need some managing. Like, the king has kicked his daughter out of the kingdom. She was, like, lost in the wilderness, and this woman, took her in and was like, "I will provide you a loving home. I'll take care of you. I'll make sure that."
Her mother.
Yeah, she fills a mother role for this perfect stranger because the stranger needs it. She orchestrates this whole thing where she's reunited with her parents, where she sets up this girl with, a guy that she has selected, but apparently like they're both into it, so it's fine. But she, clearly is kind of managing the heteronormative like roles for the other characters, but doesn't seem to want to participate herself. She's just like, I'll fix this for you, and then I'm off. I'm gonna go off on another adventure.
Yeah, she like disappears at the end. So
Yep.
yeah, definitely cool good witch vibes here.
Very
Just a little
much.
bit meddlesome.
Meddlesome, but like they needed help.
They needed help. They really
They
do.
needed some
They're
help.
they're just not doing well in this story until she comes along.
And she's like, it's okay, I'll just organize
Okay,
everything.
I'm gonna fix it.
Yes. So that brings us to the end of our selection of stories for today. And like we said at the beginning, we could really only begin to scratch the surface here. We had to choose an angle and run with it. We picked a bunch of the more sort of like magical women who are sort of insulated from the normative like family roles by virtue of their magic and are never married. But there are many, many, many other tales out there too. We also leaned pretty heavily on the Grimms today, but there's so much more out there, especially in some of the fairy tales that aren't as easily accessible that you can't necessarily find to read for free online. And if you'd like to read more, we highly, highly recommend a collection called Fearless Girls, Wise Women, and Beloved Sisters, Heroines in Folk Tales from Around the World, which is edited by the wonderful Kathleen Reagan. And not all of the women in that collection are unmarried, like at all, but many of them are. And that'll give you a bigger selection and a much more international selection than the ones that we discussed today.
So thank you so much for joining us for this lecture. A special thank you to Stacy for inspiring us to do this lecture and for supporting us on Patreon. If you are interested in getting a lecture of your own on any topic of your choice that is folklore, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Check it out at the website on the screen. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of your day.